Hello everyone, going to do another segment of albums that influenced my musical life. So I'm still talking about, I'm about 10 years old at this time, and my Aunt Helen on my mother's side, she came and stayed with us for a while, and she brought this album over. It was Boz Scaggs' Silk Degrees, and at the time, Lido Shuffle was a hit. And she had brought this album over, and so I got to listen to Lido Shuffle. But in the process, I began to like every song on the album in one way or another. And again, for a 10-year-old, that's not usually the norm, because usually when we're 10, we're just listening to the hits that are on the radio at the time or whatever, you know. And so this is, again, one of those first albums in my life where I listened to it all the way through. Years later, I found out that what the side that had Lowdown and Lido Shuffle, the hits, I thought that was always side one, and then I remember looking at it when I was in high school. I was like, oh, that's side two, and it was the other side that was actually side one. So I always found that funny. But anyway, this Boz Scaggs album's influenced me in a couple different ways that I'll share with you. But the songs on it were What Can I Say, Georgia, Jump Street, What Do You Want the Girl to Do, Harbor Lights, Lowdown, which was a hit, It's Over, Love Me Tomorrow, Lido Shuffle, We're All Alone, which was sort of a minor hit for Boz, but around the same time, Rita Coolidge, I remember, covered it, and it was a big hit for her. So I just remember liking these songs, listening to the album a lot. When my Aunt Helen moved out, she left the album at our place, and so I remember my mom and dad listening to the album a lot also. And the other way that this album influenced me is because, you know, as a kid, obviously I wasn't noticing this, but when I got involved with music as a teenager, freshman year, and playing guitar, I would look at the credits on the albums. And so the credits on this album are David Paich, Jeff Porcaro, David Hungate, Fred Tackett, and Louis Shelton. And most musicians know this story, but David Paich, Jeff Porcaro, and David Hungate, they went on to form the band Toto. And this is where it kind of got started, and then they also added Steve Lukather on guitar, and then Jeff Porcaro's brother, Steve Porcaro, was like the synth player, and they put the band Toto together. But in addition to that, they're on just about so many hit records from the 80s. They're the guys that are playing. They're the guys that are backing up the singers. They're the guys that are playing on Michael Jackson's Thriller album, and so many more hits, you know, when you think of songs from the 80s. And so those guys became musical heroes of mine, because every time I would buy an album in high school or whatever, and I'd look at the credits, one of those guys would be on there. Paich or Jeff Porcaro was on tons. He was also Steely Dan's drummer in the early days. David Hungate would be there. Steve Lukather would be on Steve Porcaro, like I said. And so these guys became musical heroes. So that's another way that this album influenced me, was because it made me aware of studio musicians and how they were so key to what was being done as far as on the radio, as far as hit records or great records. That these guys were in the background all the time playing, and lots of times we didn't know who they were. People, the general public, wouldn't know who they were. David Paich was a great songwriter. He wrote Got to Be Real by Cheryl Lynn. I think this guitar's out of tune, but let's see, the one that went like a... But he wrote a bunch of, obviously, a lot of hit songs with Toto, but a lot of hit songs and co-wrote. And then the other funny thing that I find out about this album is that I don't think I've ever played, only one song I've ever played in public. I only did that once, and that was Lido Shuffle. I remember the gig. I was in high school. I might have been a freshman or sophomore at the most, and I was playing with some band, like a pickup band, playing for somebody's house party or something like that, and we were outside, and it was October. And October, you know, can be kind of nice sometimes, or it can get really cold. And they had the band playing outside, and it was freezing, like zero, like not zero, but like freezing as in 30 degrees out. And so everybody went inside, but the band played outside. and but nobody stayed outside with the band, and so we had to fulfill our 4 hours, like 8 to midnight or whatever time they had us playing. But I just remember freezing, but got to play Little Shuffle because the bass player knew it and he sung it, and so that's the only song I've ever played off this album. And I always loved Lowdown, but never got the chance to play it. Always loved the little bridge with the guitar part, that little chord progression, but never got to play it. Anyway, Boz Scaggs, Silk Degrees. If you've never heard it, it's a great album. Check it out sometime. And check all your other albums on the credits if you still have them, and see how many from the 70s and 80s where you see David Paich, Jeff Porcaro, Steve Lukather, Steve Porcaro. They're on so many of the records that you've probably bought back in the 70s and 80s. They're on there somewhere. So thanks for watching, everyone.